Dust clogged his throat. The coppery tang of his own blood filled his senses. Jake Riley lay sprawled by the indifferent waters of the Redemption River, a discard of a man, left baking under a sky as vast and empty as his future felt. Betrayal burned hotter than the bullet wounds weeping life onto the cracked earth. Each shallow breath was a razor drawn across his lungs. He'd been played for a fool, shot by a man he worked beside, left as carrion under the orders of a man who smiled while plotting murder. This was the end, a lonely, forgotten death on the edge of nowhere. He closed his eyes, the sun searing red against his eyelids, a final, cruel mockery. Then blessed coolness. A shadow, unexpected and profound, fell across his ruined face. Air stirred. Hope, fragile and unbelievable, flickered in the desolate landscape of his mind. He forced gritty eyelids open, vision swimming. A figure stood over him, bathed in the harsh sunlight, but seeming untouched by it. A native woman. Her presence was as startling as a thunderclap in a clear sky. Dark eyes, deep as ancient canyons, surveyed him not with pity, but with an intense, assessing calm. In her hands, a simple gourd dipper held water, life itself. He was meant to die here, erased and forgotten. But her arrival, this unexpected mercy from a stranger, from one of the very people his betrayers sought to blame, it wasn't just salvation. It was the first tremor of an earthquake that would shake Marcus Flint's greedy world to its foundations. This woman, Chayton, would change everything. Before the ambush, before the blood stained the riverbank, Jake Riley had carved out a semblance of existence on Marcus Flint's Bar F ranch. It was a sprawling enterprise, fueled by Flint's relentless ambition, its fences creeping ever outward, nudging relentlessly against the ancestral hunting grounds of the Arrow Creek people. Jake worked as a ranch hand, quiet but never naive. He drifted in seeking anonymity, a place where the skills forged in a harder, more violent past could lie dormant. He was good with horses, tireless on the range, and possessed an unnerving stillness that made men like Caleb Moss, Flint's swaggering foreman, uneasy. Flint himself cultivated an image of benevolent progress. He spoke of prosperity for Redemption Creek, the nearby settlement growing in the ranch's shadow. He paid his men well, hosted gatherings, and presented a facade of respectability thick as varnish on cheap wood. But Jake saw the calculation behind the smiles, the predatory gleam in Flint's eyes when he gazed across unclaimed land. He noticed the way Flint's voice hardened almost imperceptibly when discussing the Arrow Creek, dismissing their rights with casual disdain disguised as practicality. Jake had learned long ago to watch hands, eyes, and the subtle shifts in demeanor that betrayed true intentions. He saw the way Moss's loyalty to Flint bordered on fanaticism, mixed with a crude, simmering resentment towards anyone perceived as different, especially the natives whose land Flint increasingly coveted. Life on the Bar F had a surface rhythm, the lowing of cattle at dawn, the smell of branding smoke and strong coffee, the rough laughter in the bunkhouse after sundown. Yet an undercurrent of unease flowed beneath it all. Fences seemed to shift overnight. Water access points became points of contention. Rumors circulated about Flint's backroom dealings, about surveyors seen mapping lands far beyond the Bar F's recognized borders, particularly near the river fork bordering Arrow Creek territory. Jake, repairing a fence line one sweltering afternoon, found strange markings on stones near the river. Not boundary markers, but something else, hastily concealed. He'd mentioned it casually to Moss later, just testing the waters. The foreman's reaction, a sudden stiffening, a sharp, suspicious glare before brushing it off as nothing, confirmed Jake's unease. Something was brewing, something built on secrets and greed. His quiet life felt like living on a cliff edge, the ground already crumbling beneath his boots. He just hadn't expected the push to come from behind. The assignment felt wrong from the start. Flint summoned Jake and Moss to his study, the air thick with the scent of expensive cigars and deceit. Maps covered the heavy oak desk, depicting the Bar F's domain, like a conquering empire. Flint leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. "There's a vital task, gentlemen. A ride out to the western boundary, near the Redemption River Fork. Check the lines. Ensure everything is secure. Standard procedure. He paused, then added, almost as an afterthought, and there's a small matter of delivering the payroll to the logging camp upstream. Needs discretion. He slid a weighted leather pouch onto the desk. Just you two. Keep it quiet. Jake felt a chill despite the room's warmth. Payroll delivery with only 2 riders, heading directly towards disputed territory? It was either incredibly foolish or deliberately planned. His gaze flickered to Moss. The foreman avoided his eyes, picking at a loose thread on his vest, nodding eagerly at Flint. Consider it done, boss. We'll be careful. Careful wasn't the word Jake would have chosen. Reckless, perhaps, or sacrificial. The ride out was thick with unspoken tension. The landscape shimmered under the relentless sun. Moss rode slightly ahead, his shoulders tight, occasionally glancing back at Jake with an expression that was hard to read, nervousness or anticipation. Jake rode alert, every sense heightened. He noted the unnatural stillness in the air, the absence of wildlife near the river, the feeling of being watched, though not by any animal he could detect. His hand stayed loose, near the butt of his Colt, a habit ingrained from past experiences he rarely allowed himself to recall. He scanned the terrain, noticing tracks Moss seemed oblivious to, signs that spoke of recent passage, though not necessarily native. They reached the designated spot, a narrow ravine where cottonwoods cast long shadows over the murmuring water, a place easily defensible or easily turned into a trap. This is it, Moss said, swinging down from his horse, his voice attempting nonchalance, but cracking slightly. Markers are just over that rise. Jake dismounted slowly, his boots crunching on the dry earth, his eyes never stopping their sweep of the surroundings. Too quiet. A deadly kind of quiet. Feels exposed here, he murmured, testing Moss. Yeah, Moss agreed, turning his back towards Jake, fiddling with his saddle cinch. Real exposed. The world exploded in a flash of fire and agony. The bullet ripped into Jake's side, stealing his breath, sending him staggering back against a rough boulder. Shock warred with a sickening sense of inevitability. He saw Moss pivot, the pistol held steady now, the nervous facade gone, replaced by cold, hard intent. Flint wants this loose and tied up, Moss stated flatly, his voice devoid of emotion. Said you saw too much, knew too much, or maybe just asked the wrong questions. Before Jake could react, another shot hammered into his shoulder, the impact throwing him face down into the dirt. Pain radiated outwards, blurring his vision. Dimly, through a red haze, he saw Moss approach, not checking if he was dead, but immediately going through Jake's saddlebags. Moss pulled out the payroll pouch, but his real interest was in a smaller, oilskin-wrapped packet of papers Jake hadn't even known he was carrying, documents Flint must have secretly added. Moss pocketed these crucial papers with grim satisfaction. Then, adding insult to fatal injury, Moss took Jake's own revolver, fired 2 shots towards the Arrow Creek lands across the river, and tossed the gun near Jake's outstretched hand. The frame-up was complete. Moss nudged Jake's unresponsive form with his boot. Should have stayed ignorant, Riley. He mounted up, cast one final, dismissive glance at the bleeding man, and spurred his horse back towards the ranch, leaving Jake Riley to the mercy of the elements and the inevitable decay. Darkness rushed in, swallowing Jake's fading consciousness. What were those papers? Why was this specific spot so important? The questions dissolved into the overwhelming pain and the chilling certainty of death's approach. He woke to pain, a relentless tide pulling him back from the abyss. His body felt like a shattered vessel, held together by sheer stubborn will and something else. A cool touch on his fevered brow. He blinked, his vision clearing slowly, painfully. Chayton knelt beside him, her movements deliberate and efficient. Her face, framed by straight black hair, was stern but focused, her dark eyes holding an unnerving intelligence. She didn't offer platitudes or gentle murmurs. She worked. Communication was a chasm between them, bridged only by necessity and gesture. He was desperately thirsty. She understood, offering the gourd ladle. The water was cool, reviving, easing the sandpaper rasp in his throat. She examined his wounds with a clinical detachment that was somehow reassuring. Using water from the river and cloths torn from her own clothing, she cleaned the ragged bullet holes. Then came the poultice, crushed herbs and roots, dark and pungent. It burned fiercely for a moment, then a spreading numbness eased the worst of the agony, replaced by a deep, throbbing ache. Moving him was a testament to her strength and his own flickering determination. He leaned heavily on her, gritting his teeth against the jolts of pain, as she guided him away from the exposed riverbank, deeper into the concealing embrace of the trees and thickets. Her knowledge of the land was innate. She found paths invisible to his trained eyes, moving with a silent grace that spoke of lifetimes spent in this wilderness. She led him to a shallow cave, its entrance screened by vines, a hidden sanctuary. Inside, it was blessedly cool and dry. She helped him onto a prepared bed of furs and dry grasses, exhaustion claiming him almost immediately. The following days were a blur of fever, pain, and Chayton's steady presence. She tended his wounds, brought him water, and fed him a thin, bitter broth that nonetheless sustained him. She would disappear for hours, returning silently with fresh herbs or small game, snared with an expertise that fascinated him. He watched her, piecing together fragments of understanding. He saw the way she listened to the wind, the way she read the tracks around the cave entrance, the constant vigilance in her posture. He also saw moments of profound sadness cross her face when she gazed towards the distant smoke rising from the Bar F ranch, a sadness mixed with steely resolve. As the fever broke and his strength slowly began to return, his mind cleared. The betrayal replayed itself relentlessly. Moss's cold eyes, Flint's calculated deception, the stolen papers. What secret did they hold that was worth 2 bullets and a man's life? He started trying to communicate more actively, using gestures, drawing crude pictures in the dirt floor of the cave. He showed the shooting, pointed towards the ranch, mimicked Moss taking the papers. Chayton watched patiently, her intelligence sharp. She understood the core of it: betrayal, violence, theft. She responded with gestures of her own, indicating the growing presence of armed men near the river, mimicking the driving of stakes into the ground. Her expression grim. She conveyed the pressure her people felt, the shrinking boundaries, the escalating threat fueled by Flint's lies. He felt a rising tide of indebtedness, mingled with a cold, simmering rage. He owed this woman his life. Her people were now endangered because Flint needed a scapegoat for the murder he had ordered. The desire for revenge began to twist into something more complex, a need for justice, for restitution. He started pushing his recovering body. Using a sharp flint shard, he whittled points onto sturdy sticks, practicing throws against the cave wall. The movements were stiff, painful, but familiar. The deadly focus he tried to bury resurfaced. He needed to be ready. Chayton observed his training, her face impassive, yet he sensed a subtle shift, a recognition of the dangerous path he was choosing. She knew violence. She knew survival. Perhaps she knew, better than he did, that his recovery wasn't just about healing wounds, but about preparing for the storm that was gathering, ready to break over them all. Word travels fast on the frontier, even faster when carried on winds of fear and prejudice. Back at the Bar F, Caleb Moss wore his survival like a badge of honor, recounting his fabricated tale of the Arrow Creek ambush to anyone who would listen. He played the part of the grieving, loyal foreman, but the lie gnawed at him. His temper grew shorter, his hand jumpier near his gun. He drank more heavily in the Redemption Creek saloon, his boasts about Flint's power edged with a nervous desperation. He pushed the other ranch hands harder, seeing suspicion in every sideways glance, reacting with aggressive defensiveness to innocent questions. His hatred for the Arrow Creek became a public spectacle, demanding Flint authorize punitive raids, urging the settlers to arm themselves against the savages who had supposedly killed Jake Riley. Marcus Flint, master manipulator, played his part with practiced ease. He rode into town radiating sorrow and righteous anger. He met with Sheriff Barlow, presenting the carefully planted evidence, Jake's spent cartridges. He addressed the townsfolk, his voice resonating with calls for unity and strength against the common enemy. He leveraged Jake's supposed death brilliantly, painting himself as a leader forced to take regrettable but necessary action to protect the community. Behind the scenes, his surveyors worked more boldly now, mapping the disputed land near the river fork, the land containing the Arrow Creek's sacred spring. His increased patrols weren't just for show. They were actively pushing the boundaries, testing the tribe's reaction, establishing a presence on the land he intended to claim. He met quietly with the commander of the small army detachment, subtly influencing their deployment, ensuring their presence served as narrative of imminent danger from the tribe. Chayton received updates from tribal scouts. More riders near the spring, fresh survey markers appearing overnight on ancestral ground, Flint's men behaving with increasing arrogance. She conveyed the escalating situation to Jake through urgent gestures, drawings in the dirt depicting riders, and marked stones near the symbol for the spring. The net was tightening around her people. Their traditional way of life, already threatened, was now directly imperiled by Flint's lethal ambition, using Jake's fake murder as the catalyst. Jake felt the pressure cooker building. His physical recovery was nearing completion. The wounds were healing into scars, the pain a dull memory unless he pushed too hard. But his internal state was a tempest. Gratitude warred with fury. The desire for personal revenge burned, but it was now inextricably linked with the fate of Chayton and her tribe. They were innocent victims in Flint's deadly game. He intensified his regimen, practicing not just throws but stealth, moving silently through the woods, surrounding the cave, relearning the art of becoming invisible, a skill he thought he'd left behind. He used charred wood to darken his face, melting into shadows, testing his ability to approach the cave unseen by Chayton, a grim preparation for infiltrating Flint's world. One evening, as the setting sun bled crimson across the sky, Chayton returned from a scouting trip. She carried not herbs or game, but a single eagle feather, long and perfectly marked. She held it out to Jake. It wasn't a gift of peace, but something more profound, a symbol of courage, vision, perhaps even a shared purpose. He accepted it, his fingers brushing hers. In that fleeting contact, a silent pact was forged. Language was irrelevant. They both understood the stakes. They both knew what needed to be done. Flint and Moss believed Jake Riley was rotting by the river. That mistaken belief was their shield, but it was also Jake's sharpest weapon. The time for hiding was over. The time for striking back had arrived. Driven by the need for proof, undeniable proof that would shatter Flint's carefully constructed narrative, Jake began a meticulous search. He couldn't rely on chance. Chayton guided him, showing him paths that avoided Bar F patrols, leading him back towards the treacherous ground near the Redemption River Fork. He moved with lethal quietness, his senses fully alive, reading the land not just as a tracker, but as an investigator seeking the overlooked detail, the single mistake that would unravel the conspiracy. He scanned the area around the ambush site, revisiting the place where Moss had left him for dead. Days had passed, weather had obscured tracks, but Jake's focus was absolute. Near the base of the boulder where he'd first fallen, partially concealed by tangled roots and washed in debris, a faint metallic gleam caught his eye. Not tin, not brass. Silver. He carefully dug it out with his knife point. A cufflink. Heavy, intricately worked silver, bearing a mark he recognized instantly. The stylized F cattle brand of the Bar F ranch, identical to the one Flint wore ostentatiously on his fancy vests. Jake's heart hammered against his ribs. Moss didn't own anything like this. This was Flint's. Why was it here? Had Flint come back to check Moss's work? Had he been present during the shooting? Or had he met Moss here beforehand, dropping it in his haste or agitation? Clutching the cufflink, Jake felt a surge of certainty. This was the physical link he needed. He returned to the cave, his mind racing. He showed the cufflink to Chayton, emphasizing the F brand. Her reaction was immediate. Her eyes narrowed. Then she swiftly retrieved the rolled-up hides containing her people's maps. She unrolled the oldest one, depicting the land as it once was, pointing again to the symbol for their sacred spring, a vital source of life and spiritual significance. Then she indicated the ambush location on the map, dangerously close to the spring. Next, she spread a newer map, showing the encroaching Bar F boundaries. Finally, using a piece of charcoal, she overlaid Flint's apparent ambition, a bold line slicing across the river, swallowing the spring, connecting directly to the area near the ambush site. The cufflink wasn't just proof of Flint's presence or involvement. It pinpointed why this specific spot mattered. Flint needed that land, the land with the spring. Jake, the meticulous hand known for checking boundary markers, had likely been sent there specifically to be eliminated before he could notice or report any illegal surveying or marker tampering related to Flint's planned theft of the sacred site. The payroll was merely window dressing for the true motive. Chayton then added another layer. She tapped the cufflink drawing Jake had made, then pointed eastward, away from the ranch, towards the direction of distant mining interests and powerful land speculators rumored to be backing Flint. She made a gesture signifying a meeting. Two men talking, then pointed back towards the ambush site, miming the exchange of papers. The papers Moss had stolen from Jake's saddlebag. Flint wasn't just acting alone. He likely had powerful, unseen partners. The stolen papers were probably deeds, fraudulent claims, or agreements related to the land grab, documents Flint needed secured after silencing Jake. The full scope of the conspiracy hit Jake with the force of a physical blow. It was bigger, dirtier, and more dangerous than he'd imagined. His personal betrayal was merely a pawn sacrificed in a much larger game of theft and subjugation. He looked at Chayton, seeing the fierce determination mirrored in her eyes. She had saved him, guided him, and now together they held the key. Their alliance, born of desperation, solidified into a shared resolve. They weren't just fighting for revenge or survival anymore. They were fighting for justice, for the very soul of the land itself. Marcus Flint and his hidden partners had sown the wind. Now, they would reap the whirlwind. The plan coalesced in the dim light of the cave, a dangerous gamble relying on Flint's arrogance and the growing discontent in Redemption Creek. Flint had called a town meeting, aiming to whip up support for his anti-Arrow Creek militia, the perfect stage for his public unmasking. Direct confrontation was suicide. Jake needed to sow doubt, present evidence, and let Flint's own lies trap him. Chayton's role was crucial. She and a handful of her tribe's most adept scouts would create carefully timed diversions along the Bar F's eastern perimeter. Nothing overtly hostile, just enough unexplained disturbances, maybe a small, contained grass fire quickly extinguished, or spooked cattle, designed to draw Caleb Moss and a contingent of Flint's gunmen away from town during the meeting. This would thin the ranks of Flint's immediate protectors and heighten the existing tension. Under cover of the confusion and the gathering dusk the evening before the meeting, Jake moved like a phantom. He slipped through the sparse woods surrounding Redemption Creek, bypassing the few careless watchmen. The town felt edgy, anticipating Flint's pronouncements. Reaching the alley behind the saloon, he scaled the weathered trellis leading to the balcony outside Flint's private office. The window latch, as Chayton's informant suggested, was often left unsecured. He eased it open and dropped silently into the darkness within. The air hung heavy with cigar smoke and the cloying scent of Flint's self-importance. Working swiftly by the slivers of moonlight piercing the curtains, Jake located the heavy oak desk. He opened a drawer filled with ledgers and contracts, carefully tucking the silver cufflink beneath a stack of papers, making it visible but not obvious, as if lost carelessly. He then slid the copied map, showing the illegal boundaries encompassing the sacred spring, partially under the desk blotter, ensuring a corner protruded just enough to be noticed upon close inspection. His work done, He retraced his steps, vanishing back into the night as silently as he'd arrived, leaving behind ticking time bombs of evidence. The next afternoon, the Longhorn Saloon buzzed with anticipation. Ranchers, townsfolk, prospectors, even a few wary merchants crowded the room, the air thick with sweat, stale beer, and nervous energy. Marcus Flint stood before them, radiating false bonhomie and grave concern. He spoke eloquently of shared values, of the need for vigilance, painting the Arrow Creek as an imminent threat, subtly justifying the expansion of his own influence as necessary for collective security. Caleb Moss stood near the entrance, his hand hovering near his Colt, his eyes darting around the room, visibly agitated by the earlier reports of disturbances back at the ranch. Then the saloon door swung open, casting a long rectangle of harsh sunlight into the dim interior. A figure stood silhouetted against the light. Silence fell as heads turned. The figure stepped forward, letting the doors swing shut behind him. A collective intake of breath swept the room. Jake Riley. Scars marked his face. His clothes were rougher, leaner, harder than they remembered, but it was unmistakably him. Alive. His gaze swept the stunned faces, lingering for a moment on Sheriff Barlow's widened eyes, before settling, cold and steady, on Marcus Flint. Flint's jaw dropped. The color drained from his face, his carefully rehearsed speech forgotten. Moss froze, his hand clamping down hard on his gun butt. "Riley?" Flint stammered, his voice barely a whisper, then louder, trying to regain control. We mourned you. Killed in that vicious raid." Jake's voice, though quiet, cut through the stunned silence like a honed blade. "I wasn't killed in any raid, Flint, because there was no raid." He nodded towards the increasingly pale foreman. "He shot me. On your orders. Left me for dead by the river." The saloon erupted. Shouts of disbelief, anger, confusion. Moss, panicking, yanked his pistol free, waving it wildly. "He's lying. He's crazy. Look at him." "Am I?" Jake challenged, holding Flint's gaze. "Or did you just get careless, Flint? Did you think no one would find what you lost out there?" He let the question hang, then addressed the crowd, his voice gaining strength. "Ask him about the land he wants. Ask him why he needed me silenced before I checked the boundary markers near the Arrow Creek's sacred spring." "Preposterous." Flint roared, his face flushed crimson now, trying to bluster his way through. "This man is a traitor, inventing wild tales." Jake ignored him, turning to the sheriff. "Barlow, perhaps you should take a look upstairs, in Mr. Flint's office. See if anything seems out of place. Maybe a map showing some ambitious future plans, or perhaps a small personal item, easily misplaced." Sheriff Barlow, a man who'd harbored suspicions about Flint for years, but lacked concrete proof, didn't hesitate. He pushed through the crowd, heading for the stairs, ignoring Flint's sputtered protests. Several burly townsfolk, their expressions hardening as the pieces clicked into place, moved subtly to block Flint's path. The atmosphere crackled with tension. A few moments later, Barlow reappeared on the landing. In one hand, he held Chayton's map. In the other, gleaming under the saloon lights, was the silver cufflink. He held it up for all to see. "Flint," he announced, his voice heavy with grim authority, "this cufflink looks mighty familiar. Matches the one on your wrist. And this map, well, it lays out a claim on Arrow Creek land, including their spring. That goes way beyond anything legal. You have some serious explaining to do." The facade shattered. Flint sagged as if struck. Moss let out a strangled cry and lunged for the door, desperate to escape. But the crowd surged, blocking his path. Men who had drunk his whiskey and listened to his lies now grabbed at him. A short, vicious struggle ensued near the doorway. A gunshot cracked, fired by Barlow into the ceiling to prevent a lynching. Amid the swirling dust and shouting, Moss was overwhelmed, disarmed, and hauled down, his face contorted in terror and rage. As the chaos subsided, Flint stood alone, exposed and defeated. And then, another figure appeared in the doorway, drawing all eyes. Chayton. She stood tall and composed, an eagle feather braided into her hair. She carried nothing but her own quiet dignity. Her gaze swept over the subdued moss, lingered on the ruined flint with profound disdain, and then met the eyes of the townsfolk. She didn't speak their language, didn't need to. Her silent presence, her embodiment of the people Flint had tried to demonize and displace, was the final, damning piece of evidence. Sheriff Barlow moved forward, snapping handcuffs onto Flint's wrists. "Marcus Flint," Barlow declared, "you are under arrest." The reign of the Bar F was over, brought down not just by bullets or brawls, but by the unearthing of a buried truth. In the aftermath, Redemption Creek slowly exhaled. Marcus Flint's fall from grace was swift and brutal. News of his arrest, the conspiracy, and the attempted murder spread like wildfire. The territorial judge, when he arrived, found an open and shut case, bolstered by recovered documents from Flint's office and the fearful confessions of implicated associates. Flint's wealth couldn't buy his freedom. His future would be measured in prison bars and broken reputation. The Bar F Ranch, leaderless and tainted by scandal, began to break apart, its vast holdings contested, its power dissolved. Caleb Moss's fate was sealed during a desperate, ill-conceived attempt to overpower a deputy. He died in a brief, ugly exchange of gunfire behind the jailhouse, a violent end to a violent life. The cloud over the Arrow Creek lifted, at least for a time. The exposure of Flint's scheme discredited the narrative of native aggression. While deep-rooted prejudices didn't vanish overnight, the immediate threat receded. Sheriff Barlow made a point of ensuring the fraudulent survey markers near the sacred spring were removed. A fragile, wary truce settled over the land, born not of friendship, but of shared understanding of the deceit they had all narrowly escaped. The spring remained sacred, untouched, a silent testament to the truth revealed. Jake Riley didn't linger. His purpose in Redemption Creek was fulfilled. He had faced his betrayers, aided the woman who saved him, and seen a measure of justice served. But the quiet anonymity he once sought felt different now, less like peace and more like stagnation. The trail called to him, the vast, unknown horizon holding promises, or perhaps just more challenges. The restless spirit within him, awakened by the ordeal, couldn't be contained by the familiar rhythm of ranch life or the confines of a grateful town. Before riding out, he sought Chayton. He found her near the river, where their paths had first crossed under such desperate circumstances. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows, turning the water to liquid gold. Words remained an inadequate bridge between their worlds. He held out the eagle feather she had given him. She met his gaze, her dark eyes holding layers of meaning, gratitude, respect, and an understanding of the different paths they must walk. She accepted the feather, then pressed a small, smooth river stone into his palm, a token of the land, of resilience, of memory, a silent acknowledgement of the bond forged between them, a bond that transcended words. He swung into his saddle, the worn leather familiar beneath him. He paused, looking back at Chayton one last time. She stood straight and unwavering, a part of the landscape, strong and enduring as the ancient cottonwoods lining the riverbank. Then he turned his horse west, towards the fiery embrace of the setting sun, leaving the complexities of Redemption Creek behind. Chayton watched until horse and rider were swallowed by the immense indifference of the prairie. The frontier breathed, vast and untamed, holding its secrets close. But by the Redemption River, the echoes of betrayal had been answered by courage, and the improbable alliance between a broken cowboy and a native healer had carved a small, sharp victory into the rugged heart of the West. The dust settled, waiting for the next tale to rise.